Awesome. So, um, the last lecture we were talking a great deal about CSS, and I really saw students really diving in and really fixating on what the CSS was doing. And just to quickly review that, CSS here is a general HTML5 template, and so you have your head and you have a body and you have whatever content you're going to list. And I happen to make just a simple hyperlink after a paragraph and an H1. This is really the bulk of the HTML that you need to learn. Now, the HTML that's missing, of course, is a div. We haven't taught that yet. Once we get very deeply into the next chapter, we're going to think about divs a lot. And divs give us a chance to partition the information architecture of pages into squares, and therefore think about a layout. And once we have a layout, we can begin to think about the other attributes. Does that make sense? The div introduces a whole host of other design considerations. But by design, I really mean how is the human acceptance of something. Highways, bridges, there's not a ton of design there because they're so fundamentally useful. Web pages, they are fundamentally useful, but we benefit from making them look and feel a certain way. It shows something about who we are when we cover various details and we go beyond function. We think more about the human acceptance of what we're doing. So design tends to play into that. It largely explains why companies like Apple have done so well. And in fact, we've talked in the past about how influential Apple is as an organization. When you look at the rest of tech, tech is responding to the Apple presence. So much of the unicorns, the new startups since 2008, they've all been inflected by the iPhone and the kind of consummate look and feel engineering that Apple puts into their products. Now, heretofore, Microsoft had established really the graphical dominance, the graphical experience. So when we think about the style sheet, and we began to talk about that in our last talk, the style sheet looks something like this, and it unpacks style detail for the page. So let's go ahead, let's go to my CSS, there we are. And so my CSS supplies configuration details for the H1 or for the paragraph. The color of the font becomes configurable, the size of the font becomes configurable, the background of the page becomes configurable, and that's a hyperlink. And once we've clicked on it, what does it look like? And so these are look and feel details. Now, if you make enough look and feel decisions, it all amounts into an identity, a brand identity, and it equates to its presentation. And we're trying hard to appeal to the people we're talking to. So we had examples such as Chinese people who live in rural Mongolia. They have a different sense of color. Does that make sense? The color red is very festive and very sacred. Does that make sense? At least traditionally. When you go to the coastal Chinese, they have a very different feel for color, and the colors that they're surrounded with are totally different. They're the ocean, the city, the grays of the city. Does that make sense? And so, if you were to go to a place like Great Britain, the way that color works there is quite different. There's a real, it's quite different than the American Southwest, where we have to dress differently, where we can't wear wool. In Britain, wool and the dark colors, it's what people traditionally wear. The dark colors of the wool, those are bad design decisions in the Southwest. So I just make that point because the question I'm asking you, are you communicating with rural Chinese? Are you communicating with Americans in the Southwest? Are you communicating with the British? If you are, your look and feel is going to change. The British have a very established sense of design. You look at their vehicles. You look at the font in things that are made in Britain. You look at things like Doc Martens. There's a particular design feel that comes out of British Isles. It tends to be very sturdy. It tends to weather a lot of bad weather. It's quite different than things that get made here in Southern California where we like our flip-flops.
Yeah,
And
my uncle has when he went to Ireland a long time ago, and he bought one of he's always like there's like these more traditional if you go to like where the shore is, any town along there, a lot of them make these original knitted like sweaters, and he bought one of those wool sweaters, and he's like, I love the look of them. He can't wear them here because they're so ridiculously good.
yeah,
Yeah, so it's like, but that's a style there, but the style is, and the functions there, it's to keep you cool. But in Southern California, you can't wear it. Like,
yeah, there's almost
overheat.
no opportunity.
Yeah, there's no opportunity to wear it. So he has it. It just sits in his closet.
Yeah, and then the student, just in case I'm just talking in the microphone, just the student was talking about wool, and the power of clothing in the British Isles. And so I think what's happened is wherever the British have gone, we've said, well, that their clothing defines style itself. And it's that broader European style. So here in California, we can't really wear suits, and so suits seem like a strange thing. And we're kind of like, well, wait a sec, Mr. Bond, we're talking about the web, and you're talking about suits. Well, I'm really talking about design. And is design meaningful to the acceptance of our products? And I'm leaving a question mark because, of course, in courses like this, we look at the most successful websites, i.e. eBay, Craigslist, Google. They're almost absent design. There's almost a voluntary lack of design. And so we look at other projects such as Microsoft, Apple, which are real design companies that really seek to add design to quotidian things, i.e. Computers and interfaces. And so you have to debate, is design something that we need? And so in general, what we're saying is that software is the middle ground for all societies now, more so. We're more of a Zoom-based white collar workforce. So if you have a strong sense of a web presence, people are going to work with your website all day. If you've neglected to add design to your products, is that going to be appreciated? Will people value the fact that it's been stripped down to its essence? Maybe. People may ask for something to be well designed or insist on something to be well designed. I'm finding as people go through that design is so required that people, if they don't see something that looks gorgeous, they won't work with it. They won't integrate with it. They won't touch it. They'll wait until something looks better. So I think Americans are, I don't want to say spoiled, that's not the right word. What they are is accustomed to a user experience that is frankly world class. And so you're going to have to ask yourself, if I'm designing for Americans, am I making something convenient? Am I looking out for their usability? If I'm forcing them to do things in an inefficient way, will they use my product or will they choose a competitor? Same thing goes if you go into a massive market like China. People really insist on usability. I love the usability of Samsung products. I think Samsung products export that coastal Asian sensibility, that super hyper city sensibility of South Korea to the rest of the world, where even though the Samsung products are almost never made out of very expensive materials, they're just plastic and glass, but they tend to be very concerned with how we respond to those things. And so you and I, we don't use ugly things. We use things that are designed. We don't use generic phones. We spend the extra bit and get, spend for the Samsungs or spend for the Apples. Is design important? I'm really asking questions here. For a lot of things, people respond and they make room for design things. So as web designers, we've learned to be product developers just like anybody else. And we say, well, we need to play by the same rules that Mercedes-Benz plays by. And so given that prelude, the CSS is kind of the design background. Now, HTML does not include design by de facto. You can create inline design, so where you can say, not the title, but you could say body style, and we could begin to embed a style, but then that would mean that we would have to code that ourselves, and it would create extra work. So historically we're talking about the last 15, 16 years, the CSS is absolutely required. So if you're into web design, you're working with a CSS. HTML is ultimately going to translate a CSS into something visible, something visual. And just to put it into context, the third element of the class, after your HTML and your CSS, you're going to be working with the script tag, which is probably the thing that I'm looking forward to the most, which is where JavaScript will go here, and JavaScript will be in the business of um, uh, uh, controlling the flow of data, controlling the behaviors of the page. And so a lot of the attributes and the identity that you guys are presenting through your CSS, ultimately JavaScript is the web developer. JavaScript causes things to appear. And once they've appeared, what should they do? JavaScript is the arbiter of interactivity. So now that we've done that bit of review, what I want to say is, here, let's take a look at Apple. Um, you know, I think in year 2006, when I was finished with grad school, and I was involved in startups, and we were involved in building out the identities for things. CNN was very much the middle ground for web design. The big New York Times, CNN really was the kind of the center of the internet, and that changed. I think now CNN is not as important to people. There is this tiny group of people who stick with CNN. I think there's 750,000 daily viewers, and that's quite small compared to some of the properties. You all probably look at YouTubers who have, thousands of times more viewers than that, daily. The Mr. Beasts, they have way more pull. The TikTokers have way more pull than the CNNs. So what I do like about the Apple page is, if you click on these top links, there's this dark bar at the top, and these, of course, are custom built. But as you move over the font is in Helvetica. They're really investing heavily in the photography, in the visual presentation. You notice the rounding of the buttons, the hover behavior of the links. Let's learn more. This is That's HTML. You can tell because you can highlight it and you can copy and paste it. Versus these are images. And so when I click on the image, I might be able to select, the image to a certain extent. These, of course, are images, but the page is meant to fill the boundary of the viewport. So if we maximize, this is kind of the size of it. And of course, they're building in these little photoshopped icons. But in general, there's the top bar, and there's the Helvetica mouse over. It's minimal, but it's also maximal. It's really offering everything that the viewer wants to look at. So going over to the Macs, the same basic strategy. There's this kind of highlight bar at the top. The little photoshopped icons. The rounded buy button, and the buttons, they look different than the links to the to the learn mores. Each of these look a bit different than the price element. So good. All right. So going from there, the CSS that we'll be using going forward is called Bootstrap. And in many ways, the Bootstrap is more influential than the Apple website itself. Remember, I was talking about CNN, and probably the web is the center of design on the web is probably the Apple, whatever Apple happens to be doing. They're going to push design and presentation as far as they can. I think historically, Mercedes-Benz is one of the most influential presentation firms. I don't think CNN has the influence. I think Apple has the influence when it comes to the web. I think if we look at Mercedes-Benz, which frankly has been relegated to second-tier status by the Teslas, traditionally they have this kind of font, but you can see there's a similar type of strategy where there's a top dark bar. The website has some maneuverability that's different. Typically, if you look at Mercedes-Benz, you'll see an identity that's singular. I don't necessarily see that. It's been quite a while since Benz has been a big, influential firm. You look at the Tesla; they really tried to let the image speak for the most part. The website is just a series of huge background images that are really just scrollable in this little detail piece on the side. I imagine there's more traffic going to the Tesla website here in California than there is for either Porsche or Benz. But the reason why I put that out there is, these websites have a lot of design and styling in common, but the most influential source of design for websites right now is coming from an organization called Bootstrap. And so if you look at a website now, there's probably at a 90% likelihood that there's a Bootstrap theme. Bootstrap has a CSS where you can style the CSS. So most likely if you meet somebody who's a web designer, their job is going to be finding the right Bootstrap template for you, and then having you buy it for $50, and then they'll download the theme and begin implementing the theme. And that's really the secret to how things look great. Where here, let's launch the live preview, and you guys are invited to look through these themes, and you can see how they're imitating the Apple icons at the top. This is meant to be, for example, a website for a grocery or an online e-commerce grocery. So to make a long story short, Bootstrap is really at the center of website styling. So next, the answer is, well, how do we begin to use it? And my favorite way for students beginning to use it is what's called CDN, or Content Delivery Network. And so what we're going to do is grab this text, and I hope the video will show so instead of creating a style sheet here, why don't we kind of comment that out, Control/, and then we'll place this CDN linkage. So instead of there being a style sheet that we create locally, there's going to be a style sheet that we link remotely. And the reason why I like that is because while you're using Bootstrap, Bootstrap will provide for you an extra bit of connectivity by supplying the CSS to anybody who opens your website. I'm going to grab the JavaScript bundle, which will enable its interactivity. And so this will be a little bit of JavaScript that will facilitate loading all of that. So that's a good first step in getting, and of course we'll go Control S. And so now as we load, I don't know if this will change the way that the website looks necessarily, because we only have the H1 and the P's right there. But let's kind of load this and we'll see where we're at. And you can see there's already a little bit of a transition in terms of the identity. Let's boost that. You can see that it's using the Bootstrap font type. Links are beginning to behave as they would on Bootstrap. And so for this discussion, why don't we jump in and talk about what Bootstrap has to offer, and then in the follow-up discussion, we'll start to take apart a little bit of Bootstrap and then begin to implement Bootstrap. I'm sorry, let me say this and then you go ahead. It's a student question. Firstly, we're going to kind of go shopping, where we're going to look at all that Bootstrap can do within the examples. And then we're going to say, ooh, I want to implement sidebars. And we'll go in and we'll grab some of the HTML to make this sidebars possible. That's one sidebar, two sidebar, three sidebar. Imagine making this along the side of your web page. So we make something that looks a little bit like Apple Messages. That's how you would make the style for that. Yes?
Yeah. Do you need, so like on the page where to get Bootstrap, do you need all three of the scripts to get them through?
Yeah, I like to download it all. So I think there are two. Is there a third?
I'm just looking at the link for the JavaScript. Looks like there's three. At least from the link from the module 5.
You need them all. Let me just
Okay, so
give
yeah, just grab them all
the
and
quick answer.
recommend.
So I'm like, what did I miss? Include via CDN.
Oh, maybe I'm on the wrong.
So what you're going to do is get bootstrap.com and then go down to include via CDN. Now the alternative is to download the entirety. So there's a big download button. Now typically people are they're using NPM, which is Node Package Manager. We're not using Node just yet. Now you can download it, so you go download if you want, and download the compiled CSS and JS, and then you just begin to make your CSS right next to the distribution. I'd like to encourage people to use this right now because it's super simple, include via CDN. So I hope that makes sense. So let's go ahead and let's go into some of the examples, and we'll talk for just a moment longer. And now here they allow you to download the examples. That's really a step forward. Um, this is what's called the kitchen sink. So they like to show off all the components. And so what you're going to do is you're going to go inspect, and then the HTML specific to that element is going to be, so you can choose on this chooser, and then you can select the element that interests you, and you can look at how that HTML works. And so you can begin to implement the HTML according to the example. And we'll do this in the next lecture because it's a job. And then you begin to implement div, class, list group, w auto, and then begin to fill in the content per the example. Yep.
I also like Bootswatch. As Bootswatch, they have free themes, so you don't have to use the $50 ones when you get
Yes,
Bootstrap.
a student was just saying Bootswatch. Maybe you were able to hear him. Bootswatch is free Bootstrap themes. So if you are a web developer and you're trying to save your clients money, save the $50 and get the free template. Classic student stuff. Guys, just so you know, a custom website, custom web system, is about $25,000 a month. So, if you have the $50 theme or not, that's what you charge people for building custom websites. It's that much. It's worth that much to people to have a world-class looking site. And I think that's become more expensive, with inflation where it is. So what you do is you find the example, then you drill down to the HTML element that intrigues you. Here it's this area, and then you begin to follow the HTML that you select, and you go div class, list group. So a little bit on the div. Now this div, it's a square, and you can see what it looks like here. The computed dimensions, it supplies a div, so this thing is a div. It supplies a position on the page, either left or right, a margin, which is a width, a border, which is a style, and then a certain degree of padding, and then they provide a certain amount of dimensions or space for content. And so you would fill in the content at that point. So the div is really just a box that appears on the screen somewhere. And so the class of it is list group w auto. And so the class is what you supply in your HTML in order to turn on the style feature. So if you take a look at the CSS, this is what the CSS looks like in relationship to that div. So this is what the CSS looks like behind the scenes. Just like you had created a CSS with the colors, this is what the CSS looks like here. And let me just say there are thousands of little options that exist within Bootstrap. So as good a job as you did the other day in creating your own CSS, I think the bigger skill is not in doing your own CSS if you're a developer, but rather taking a CSS from a professional designer and then implementing it within the HTML classes. So just to review, If you type div and then you type the class is equal to this, then you will get the styling related to that div. So next time we get together, um, I want to go ahead and hack a bit of Bootstrap where we'll, um, I'm not feeling great today. so I think we've done enough where A, we'll get our header, our link right here, and then we'll begin to experiment by doing something along these lines. Class is equal to, and then we'll fill in whatever class interests us from within Bootstrap, which is in itself a bit of homework. So I want to put you, I want to say to you, you know, web design is work, but before the work begins, we go shopping, and we go shopping for a style that interests us, or we go looking for some components, you know, that intrigue us. You know, if we want to make something that resembles Apple, you know, boy, this looks a lot like Apple, doesn't it? You know, who is more influential, Bootstrap or Apple? You know, Bootstrap was making, you know, Apple has kind of perfected this, um, this kind of page having architecture. But Bootstrap has perfected this kind of Helvetica based. Bootstrap was doing this header long before Apple was using it. You know, who is more influential? Is it Apple or is it Bootstrap? You know, it's hard to say. I'd say Bootstrap is kind of the center of the web as it pertains to style. Do people go to Apple to learn style, or do people download Bootstrap and begin to use the Bootstrap? So at minimum, Bootstrap is the discussion. It's the centerpiece for style debate on the web. How should things look? So I want to put you in the driver's seat. Oh, let's get that Apple, see that Apple nav bar at the top, the links at the top. So if we want to implement this, we'll simply borrow that CSS. So good first talk. I'm going to sign off and then let you begin to hack around with it. Thank you very much.